Welcome to this screencast on require and load in Ruby. You'll see what they are and how to use them. So in a file called rec2.rb, I just have a declaration and for a string with a variable v has a high value. So in rec1, I'm just going to do a require of rec2 file and print that particular value of v in that file. But it says undefined local variable or method v from main object. So it doesn't allow you to access that value. But if this variable is a class variable, then I can print the value of it. So it's a variable v is high. Now it's able to access the value of v if it's a class variable. Let's try another one. I'll declare a constant total equals maybe 100 and print the value of the total here. So it can see the value of the constant also. So if it's a class variables or a constant, then you have access to it in the require. Require basically means it contents of whatever file you're doing require is available from the line you typed require. It is a method in the kernel module, so it's available as a top level method. By top level, I mean you don't have to do a require for a kernel module as such, so it's available for you to just use it. So now let's see what the load actually uh, does. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file. Let's call this load example. Here I'll just say print example for load in Ruby. And I'm also going to create another file, load test, and it's just going to print a string saying I'm in a load test file. Okay, so in the load X I'll do require to pull in that file load test and then print this thing out. Run this. So example for load in Ruby, it prints the first statement in this file and then it pulled in that load test at this point, and whatever was in that load test, it executed that instruction. So you have I am in load test file here at this point. You can also do extension, but you don't really have to do this. Whereas if you're doing a load, then you have to specify, otherwise it will blow up. So let's say I say load, run this, you can see it's pulling in that file and executing it. If I don't give the extension, it'll blow up. No such file to load test. So when you're using load, you need to give the extension. So here's another difference. But when would you use load versus require? So let's see another example for this. I'm going to just modify this example, load example. require load test file. Okay, and then I just do a require load test, print again after the require load test file, then do it again another require load test, and get rid of this. When I run this, you can see about to require load test file. First time I do a require, it pulled in the contents of it and executed. I'm in the load test file. The second time it ran after the require load test file, again the second require didn't load that file again. But if I do a load and have the extension also in here, see it reloaded the file again. It basically you can it pulls in the files every time. So require looks for an extension in the files on the system and evaluates it according to Ruby rules. And in load, it loads multiple times regardless of whether that file changed or not. So require is useful in the case when you have a file whose content is not really changing and there is no point in including it multiple times. But the load is useful. Let's say I change this. Let me open up a terminal. I'll just go to the directory. So here, what I'm going to do is go to the IRB. I'll just do a require load test. I'm in load test file and it says true. It says I loaded it. That's what Ruby is saying. If I do it again, require load test, it doesn't load it again. Right? So if I make change here, changed, and I do a require, it doesn't do anything. Whereas if I do a load test.rb, I'm in a load test file, changed. I'll go back and change this. And I'll do a load again. See? It picked up the changes. So this is how actually the Rails works when your server is not really restarted. You make changes to the code and it gets picked up and it runs. So that's the power of load, doing a load, so you know when to use the load versus require. And the include statement has nothing to do with files. When you include, you basically import that modules, methods, variables, constants into the namespace that's including. Actually, I have another separate screencast on include versus extend and how it works. This gives you a good overview of load and require, and now we know how load is useful. It gives you the ability to reload your updated files into a running instance of a Ruby program. And that's it for this screencast, and see you next time. If you enjoyed this screencast, please recommend me on working with Rails. Thank you.